This Clinton wins Massachusetts thing is a good example of what I was talking about and what many people have pointed out. It's currently at 95% reporting. Clinton 50.3, Sanders 48.5. You can't truly call that, especially not with the last precincts coming from the most populated areas around Boston, and everybody being aware of that. But they call it early to get the headlines before everybody goes to bed, and it's this reinforcing thing, right? People just have to be able to see it for what it is. It's the only way to deal with it. The delegate count, by the way, is 45 for Clinton and 43 for Sanders. Given that the three precincts still to report are known to be heavily populated Boston area precincts, it's actually likely that it'll win the delegate count, albeit barely. If I understand right, it's not strictly proportional, but based on who wins that precinct. That happened to Clinton in 2008. She won the popular vote, but lost the delegate count because she got beaten in the urban cores. Anyways, it's 1 o'clock now. I'll close down within a few hours, no doubt. We'll see how that works out, but it's just a good example of how this works. I'm going to need to wait until some more data comes in to do a closer analysis and debunk the race theory, but considering that I caveated Oklahoma, which seems to have finished voting fairly quickly, indicating, I wrote here a low turnout, but I mean just like a low amount of voters, a small number of voters, and a small base of exaggeratedly liberal voters. As I hypothesized, Oklahoma is just so overwhelmingly Republican. All the businesses are Republican, all the social advancement is Republican, so you don't bother joining the Democratic Party unless you're ideologically aligned with it. It's this difference between, somebody that, for example, Donald Trump. Donald Trump might join the Democratic Party because he thinks it's good for business without really believing in anything it says. Likewise, he might join the Republican Party because he thinks it's good for business. Depends on where he is, what all the people around him think. So, that entire swath of people, they're all Republican voters because that's what the society is dominated by, right? So you don't bother joining the Democratic Party unless you're ideologically aligned with it. You'll probably see the same thing in places like Nebraska and Wyoming. They're very red states. Sure. But the 10 people that bother showing up to vote are going to be doing so purely of conviction. I mean, I understood this. I was a little skeptical about it. I maybe wasn't... I didn't think it was going to be that exaggerated. I thought maybe the polls might be overweighting independents. But they did work out. It'll be interesting to see how many more of these Midwestern states kind of have that same kind of dynamic. I pointed out Nebraska and Wyoming, but what about Kansas? Kansas is a red state, clearly, but is it so red that the only thing left is like the only Democratic base left is that really liberal base. It's hard to say. It's well, it's why they have the votes, right? What I'm getting at is that my red state blue state breakdown might be a little bit broken based on that. And the racial breakdown may be slightly useful in that context, even if the real dividing point is ideology. In other words, what they might... It's not... It's less that these states have a higher percentage of white voters and less that they have a lower percentage of black conservatives. Right? So, I mean, pointing it out is useful, but it's not like, it's not like whites being proactively for Sanders, so much as it's that these states don't have that base of black voters that are really Republicans, but vote Democratic based on, the historical realities. As confused as the whole thing is, but based on the reality that the Republican Party has a lot of deeply seated racist realities to it, right? So, and I mean that's really the basics of what I'm saying is that it's um, what the phenomenon that you're seeing in a place like Georgia, and maybe to a lesser extent in Texas, is that um, and it's this isn't really the deciding factor. Clinton would have won anyways. But the deciding factor, the reason that you're seeing, sorry, it's not the deciding factor, but the reason that you're seeing these larger um, black uh, support levels for Clinton is not that she's more popular amongst blacks, it's that she's more popular amongst conservatives. And it happens to be that these areas have a large number of black conservatives that vote for the Democrats. Um, despite the fact that if you were to line them up on an issue by issue basis, they would be Republicans. It's just that if you're black, you can't vote for the Republicans in the South because they'll lynch you, right? So it's this fucked up kind of reality, right? And then Democrats have to deal with that as they go through the political process. That I mean, you've got this this big base of black voters. Like I say, I don't want to get too harsh on this because I don't really. I think it's pretty clear if you look at the numbers that it wouldn't have made much of a difference in any of these states. Like, there's not a state where Clinton won because of the blacks, right? So we can't really, like if we end up electing this war criminal, there's not really a basis to blame it on black people, right? And that's what I'm trying to get across here. I don't want to wake up in 6 months and be in this situation where we've got this horrible woman who's going to be, president, and it's all the black people's fault for doing it. It's not. And the way the media is setting this up, I know that what they're trying to do is they're trying to, put pressure on you. Don't associate with the white trash racist scum. Vote for Clinton. It's some kind of like psyop that the establishment is trying to push down. And that's fine. I'm smart enough to break through that. That doesn't really bother me. And I don't really care what people think if they're stupid enough to fall for that, right? What I'm more concerned about is the possibility of it backfiring in the long run. And us being stuck in the situation where we're blaming black people for, this mess that we're in, kind of thing. And the data really doesn't uphold that. It's very tempting. Even somebody who really doesn't, somebody that doesn't really need a lot of focus on ripping these things apart. I mean, I think we all, we live in a structurally racist society. We all have to, make some attempt to, shield ourselves from it and break it down. Somebody like myself who is actually aware of it, who doesn't really need a lot of reinforcement, it's still tempting because she's so bad. She's such a terrible candidate. If only the if only the Republicans weren't, out there, then all of these conservative black voters could move to the right party, and the Democrats could get a liberal candidate and all of these sorts of things, right? But again, like I say, if you look at the data, if you remove black voters entirely, she would still win. If you removed Hispanic voters entirely, she would still win. She's winning amongst white voters. She's winning amongst men. She's winning amongst women. She's winning amongst every demographic that you can imagine in the South. All right? And so if you're going to blame someone, let's blame it on the South. Like we blame everything else that's wrong with America, because just about everything that is wrong with America is the South. Okay, this hyper Christian culture, that's focusing on these. I'm not that I don't want to really start getting off on this. Okay, but this is what I want to be careful about. Okay, so my whole I got off on this as my whole red-blue breakdown is it might in the end not quite work out as well as I had initially suggested. I'm aware of that, just because, like I say, there are so many of these states like this where like there's no means of advancement in society by joining the Democratic Party, and so really the only people that are voting Democrats are working class people, and in these areas, it's majority white, right? So that's just, you know, something to keep in mind regarding that. Um, so yeah, you'll probably see the same thing in places like Nebraska and Wyoming. They're very red states, sure, but the 10 people that bother showing up to vote are going to be doing so purely out of conviction. I mean, I understood this. I was a little skeptical about it. So we're just waiting on a winner in Massachusetts. Again, I need data, but combining 2008 race data with 2016 numbers. So Arkansas is overwhelmingly white. The turnout is 66% Clinton. Tennessee is mostly white, about 70% or so. The turnout is 66% Clinton. Texas, less than half white. The turnout is 66% Clinton. And Virginia is about the same as Tennessee, maybe a little bit less. The result is 64% Clinton. So we can see that the race is fluctuating all over the place while support for Clinton is remaining pretty stable. Again, that kind of goes back to what I was saying, which is that you can see that it's very clear that in this broad area in the South, you're looking at about 2/3 of the voters are going to support Clinton. The racial background of these voters is fluctuating all over the place. Some areas it's as much as 80% white. Some areas it's less than half white, but it's still the same level, right? So obviously her support is not dependent on minorities. And there's a completely other set of factors that is combining to create about 2/3 of the support being Clinton, regardless of whatever the racial breakdown of the voters is. Okay? It's not enough to point out that high numbers of Southern minorities are voting for Clinton. Clearly, high numbers of Southern whites are too, right? So that might be true, but you need to balance that off against, other numbers, right? As far as I know, there's not a situation like this, but you could say, look, 85% of blacks are voting for Clinton, but then if you work it out, you might see that 90% of whites are voting for her. I mean, as far as I know, the numbers are pretty consistently that there is a slightly higher level of blacks. Like I say, I think we can explain that in the South specifically, by pointing out that black conservatives don't have a voting. Really, that's the way to put it. Okay, black conservatives are disenfranchised in the South. They don't have a party they can vote for, so they have to. So I mean, they want to vote. They've been told that they should vote, so they vote for the Democrats, right? And I mean something. It's a shitty place to live if you're a black person, right? So I mean, like you want to. On the one hand, you want to, like this is like you're voting for the Liberal Party, but you're a conservative. This doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, it's like, well, like, what do you suggest I do? Go sit in the corner and go sit on my thumb, like and hope things get better, So, but it's clearly something else about the South, rather than race, that's creating this stable level of support for Clinton, as racial numbers fluctuate all over the place. Okay. The other two southern states that Clinton won to date are Alabama, which is 51% black, and Georgia, which is 51% black. They both voted more than 70% Clinton. We have to keep in mind that we're dealing with statistical margins of error here and everything else. But 78% Clinton is clearly higher than 66%, and 71% is higher than 66% as well. I'd have to do more tests. I can't intuitively determine if that's meaningful or not. I suspect that you will see the number of Clinton supporters was higher amongst both whites and blacks. Okay, meaning that it might be the case that, like in Alabama, Clinton may have gotten 85% blacks, but she probably got 75% whites, right? And that would be higher than she got, blacks and whites, right? So if you compare Alabama and Arkansas, right, it might be that she got 85% blacks in Alabama and 70% blacks in Arkansas. I'm just making these numbers up right now. But it would also be the case that she got, 75% whites in Alabama and 60% whites in Arkansas, right? So there's an increase in both of them. It's just, so the number's higher, but it's higher because the whole thing moves up, not because there's more blacks that voted for, right? So this idea that there's more blacks, therefore she had a higher total, is misleading. It's her numbers are going to be higher across the spectrum, right? And it would be the same thing in Georgia, except maybe toned down a little bit, right? So what I'm saying is I suspect that you will see that the number of Clinton supporters is higher amongst both whites and blacks when you compare these states to the other four, indicating that it wasn't just that more blacks were voting for Clinton, but that more whites were too. So we cannot blame it on black people. When Clinton wins, this whole, it's black people's fault that Clinton won. I don't want to hear that. It's bullshit. White people were voting for her too, okay? And so this is what the media does, right? If you don't support the establishment candidate, you must be white trash, racist scum. And if you read the media, that is what we're getting, stop supporting this candidate that, this is the candidate that, unsuccessful white people in West Virginia are supporting, right? And this is the narrative that they're pushing down, right? And that she's pushing down. I was hoping he could keep her under 60 in Virginia, with the hope that we would see some more black support behind Sanders because there's more black liberals there. And I do still suspect that you'll see a higher number of black liberals supporting Sanders, particularly around DC, meaning that the reason that the numbers balanced out was because she had higher white support there, but I have to wait for data to see.